Good morning and welcome to the 8th meeting of the Health, Social Care and Sport Committee in 2025. I've received apologies from Elena Whittam and David Torrance. The first item on our agenda is for the committee to agree to take item 4 in private. Are members agreed? The next item on our agenda is an evidence session with representatives from Sport Scotland, and I welcome to the committee Maureen Campbell, Chair, and Forbes Dunlop, Chief Executive Officer of Sport Scotland. Before I start, I invite Forbes Dunlop to make a brief opening statement.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Committee. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come along today and to discuss the important contribution that sport makes. We all know the benefits of sport, we all know the benefits of being physically active, and sport plays a really important part in keeping the nation active. Sport contributes to the current government priorities set out in the Physical Activity for Health framework launched last year, and in turn to the national outcomes. 62% of children meet the physical activity guidelines, and when you include school activity, that rises to 72%. 63% of adults meet those guidelines. The guidelines are those set by the Chief Medical Officer, and those statistics come from the Health Report in 2023. As well as the physical and mental health benefits, sport makes an important contribution to the economy. In recent work that we had commissioned, the report concluded that sport makes a contribution of £3.8 billion to GVA and 69,000 people employed in the sports sector. Whilst we know that sport makes a significant contribution to health and to social impact, we need to balance that out with the realism of the pressures and the stresses that the sector currently faces. Local investment in sport and physical activity has dropped quite significantly in the last 10 years. That was a piece of work we did in the autumn led by Ecos Consulting that concluded around about a 20% drop in investment. That's resulted in a significant reduction to sport-specific officers working at a local level, and significantly it is also now impacting on the sports facilities estate. Well documented the rises in costs around about energy and staffing, maintenance bills and construction costs, and we're now seeing the impact of all of those in some sports facilities closing, some reduction in opening hours, increase in costs to access those facilities, and maintenance backlogs in a number of facilities across Scotland. Sport Scotland has commissioned a significant piece of work to look at the sporting estate, and the first wave of that information will come through in the springtime. We've looked at the estate in its whole, so the facilities that are out there and the usage of those facilities, and after that we'll work with local partners to look at what we need for the future. But that will be a significant piece of work that we would like to bring back forward, or at least share with committee members in the spring. At the heart of the sporting network, the sporting community, are clubs, volunteer-led clubs. There are over 800,000 people who are members of clubs in Scotland. This volunteer-led network is the envy of many sectors. It really is the backbone of Scottish sport. But again, there are significant pressures on those clubs and those volunteers, and we need to limit both the financial and the administrative burden on our clubs and our volunteers. As a sector, we work very closely together. We regularly meet with local and national partners. We talk about the challenges that are being faced and the collaborations and how we can work better together to address and find solutions. We also talk about the importance of advocacy and influencing roundabout sport, and have good awareness as to the challenges that the sector are facing. As the National Agency for Sport, we have made decisions recently that we must do everything we can to protect investment going out the door, going to our partners to deliver against sport. And we're currently in the process of a strategic workforce review and a voluntary severance scheme, with the purpose of freeing up internal costs to keep money going out the door to our partners to support the important work that they do. In summary, we know that more investment is required at a local and a national level if the sector is to continue to respond to the challenges that we face. And I'd conclude by saying public funding for sport must be considered as an investment and not a cost. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr Dunlop. We're going to move straight to questions, and Joe Fitzpatrick.
Thanks very much. Good morning, Forbes and Maureen. Thanks for coming along at relatively short notice. It's really appreciated. Obviously, it's really important that the benefits of sport are available to all sections of society. So it was of some angst to all of us and some great concern when back in 2022 the review produced by Plan for Sport on the changing boundaries concluded that the governance and leadership practice of Cricket Scotland were institutionally racist, and obviously at that point Cricket Scotland was placed into special measures working with Sport Scotland to work through the recommendations. Since then the committee's taken evidence from Sport Scotland on 2 occasions in October 2022 and 2023, but we haven't managed to hear from you since the special measures were removed in November 2024. So it'd be good just to hear your confidence that Cricket Scotland has gone through all the actions and maybe a bit about what you're doing as an organisation to make sure it isn't happening not just in Cricket Scotland but anywhere else.
I'll maybe start and then Forbes can give a wee bit more detail. I think you're absolutely right. We are very concerned to ensure that there is no racism in sport, and that we want to do all that we can to make sure that there is no place for racism. We want to make sure that sport is accessible and equal for everyone. In respect of the Cricket Scotland situation in particular, the board did decide to take Cricket Scotland out of special measures and into a supported framework. There's a new chief executive in post and a new chair along with a new board, and they have been working tirelessly to address the recommendations that were contained within the Changing Boundaries report and the outcome of the work that was subsequently done in the resolutions team. So I think it's been really positive in terms of the changes that have been made. It is still a journey and a way to go, and I think there's a huge amount of work still to be done, but I would want to acknowledge the progress that Cricket Scotland have made, and Forbes will give you a wee bit more of the detail.
Thanks, Maureen. So against the recommendations in changing the boundaries, they were particularly focused around about some structural and some governance changes for Cricket Scotland. There was a full governance review undertaken and subsequently changes taken to an EGM and importantly supported by the members, which has streamlined the governance of Cricket Scotland and made very clear the accountability back through the board of Cricket Scotland. So that's quite a significant change, and I think it was important that Cricket Scotland were given time to consult with their members, for their members to understand the implications of that change and ultimately for their members to support that, which they did. Maureen's touched on, we now have a permanent Chief Executive in Cricket Scotland, Trudy Limblade, and likewise a permanent Chair in Cricket Scotland. We had a number of short-term appointments in those positions, but that has now settled. There's a new board being appointed, and there's a number of new members in the team of Cricket Scotland. Cricket Scotland have also now completed, with a full consultation with the cricket community, they've now completed a new strategy, an EDI plan, and just on Saturday there, it's part of International Women's Day, they launched a girls and women's strategy for the sport. So there's some big governance and structural changes that have happened and are now in place and give the sport much clearer accountability to everything that happens in the sport going forward. I would say, and it's important to say, that the referrals and the subsequent investigations from that came from changing the boundaries, there's still significant unhappiness and unrest round about those. Those who brought forward original complaints feel as though that the investigations and sanctions have not gone far enough and have not held people to accountable. Those who have been complained about and who were in leadership positions at the time feel as though the process was not strong enough and did not support the history and the background to the full extent. So the sport has made some significant changes and progress, I believe. The referrals, the investigation and a number of the individuals involved are still significantly frustrated with where that's got to.
Thanks very much. And I do think this is a really important area. And cricket, from my experience, is really accessible to a wide range of people. And I was recently at Kinloch Cricket in Dundee in the opening of their new cricket pitch. And you can see that a real diversity of people playing the sport. So it's really important that folk have confidence, and it's great to hear the continuing efforts to get more women involved in the sport as well. In terms of going forward, are we monitoring just how much members of ethnic minorities are being involved in different sports? Or is that something we would consider doing to make sure that that data is there, and if so, is it published?
We are, and on the cricket situation first, I think it was always the case, and it was maybe one of the frustrations that the good work that was being done by clubs around the country wasn't recognised over the past few years, because cricket clubs in Scotland have been doing a brilliant job, and the membership of cricket clubs is amongst the most diverse in any sports. The issue was that when it moved into decision-making positions, board positions, senior positions, then that diversity wasn't represented in the leadership of the sport. But I think it is important to recognise the great work that a number of volunteers were doing in cricket clubs across the country over the years. We do, as part of our annual returns from all sports, get a breakdown of membership against protected characteristics. Some sports have much more detailed membership data that they can share with us, and others, quite often that goes down to the structure of the membership within the governing body, whether it's an individual return, a club return, and you can imagine that there then can be some differences. And we've also been discussing and debating, and the board have been discussing and debating a challenge which I know goes across many sectors, which a lot of people don't want to necessarily share some of their personal details these days. So we do ask for full returns every year. We can monitor, we can see trends. Different sports with different membership schemes give you different levels of information.
Guidance from Sport Scotland about how that should be done, because it's one of the things that as a committee we kind of frequently are frustrated about, is that the lack of or inconsistent data makes it difficult to have those comparisons. So I guess if there was some sort of guide, maybe it's just something to consider, whether there's something you could do in the future to try and get data that is more comparable, that would be helpful to ourselves and others.
Absolutely. I mean, we do provide guidance and templates and a consistent approach to it. The inconsistency, if you like, comes down to the membership structure within each sport and exactly how much of that they're able to collect.
Sandesh Gohani.
Thank you. Good morning, panel. I'd just like to ask a very quick question. Forbes, you said in May 2023, when it comes to racism, it is no longer good enough to not be racist. Scottish sport must become anti-racist. What exactly did you mean by that statement, and what have you done in the 2 years since you made that statement?
Thank you. What I meant by that statement was it's no longer good enough to stand on the sidelines and call out racism when you see it. We need to be more proactive about educating the entire workforce, including the volunteer workforce, and we need to be much more confident in addressing issues of racism when they do occur. And since that time, we've done a raft of education. So around about 200 people in the last 2 years have been through EDI education courses that Sport Scotland facilitate. That's not just our staff, but it's members of governing bodies and members from local authorities, active school managers, community sport hub officers, etc. So quite a big piece of education there. We've also been working very closely with the University of West of Scotland around about an anti-racism framework, learning and taking best practice from the university sector, who we believe have done some really good work in this area, and work in particular with Khadija Mohammed, who I think is a recognised leader and recognised expert in this area. We haven't as yet published an anti-racism framework, but we are having conversations, discussions about that, and it is our intention to have a framework which sport could adopt.
You'll know that in 2023 the committee conducted a report in female participation in sport, and we identified quite a number of barriers. I was just wondering what Sports Scotland has done to encourage female participation in sport, what they're doing at the moment, and what else you think might need to be done in maybe coordination with the Scottish Government to just try and continue with that work.
I think there's been a huge amount of good work done to acknowledge the inequalities that there are, particularly for girls and women in taking part in sport. We're working hard to address that, and there's been a number of initiatives put in place in order to encourage governing bodies, clubs and communities to make sure that their facilities are fully accessible and open and welcoming. Partnerships obviously lie at the key of this, and I think the success that we've had, particularly listening to young people, to young girls and women, as to what they feel would help them to be more regular participants. There is a number of initiatives, particularly the Fit for Girls programme, which is a partnership with the Youth Sport Trust, which is aimed to get girls to be peer mentors in order to support and encourage other girls to stick with and to stay involved in sport. The data around our Active Schools programmes, we've got about 46% of those participants are female, and it's really about trying to sustain and keep girls and women going through sport and physical activity, perhaps when other constraints come along that make it more difficult for them to sustain their participation and to break down any perceived barriers that exist. So we're really working hard to encourage young girls to stay involved, but we're also working hard with governing bodies to recognise the value of having older women, particularly menopausal women, getting involved in sport and physical activity for the health benefits that come from that. And you'll see a lot of governing bodies introducing initiatives that encourage and sustain women's participation. And we know that if women are involved, that quite often then means that children get involved, which makes it easier to sustain participation. So we're very much encouraging that. We had a really successful Women and Girls Sport Week last year, supported by many of you and many others, in order to try to make sure that we were highlighting the excellent work and opportunities that exist for women and girls across the country.
I wonder if I could just come in. I've got a specific example around funding and the bias perhaps in funding. I recently met with Zoe Lee from Netball Scotland. Now, we know that netball is predominantly a female sport, but they don't currently play in the UK League. I know they would love to, and they're very supportive of it, but there is definitely something in that attraction of funding to female sports. And I think young women and girls, if they could see netball, women, female netball players, it might help their participation. I just wonder what Sports Scotland can do to try and address that.
Forbes might pick up on the specifics of the Netball League. It's a complicated one.
Yeah, we were in quite extensive discussions with Netball Scotland round about the Super League and the participation. Scotland did have a team and then withdrew last year. We don't support any sports teams at that professional level. It's something we've never done, and in the previous iterations when Netball Scotland did put a team in, it was supported through commercial sponsorship and other public sponsors through university sector and Glasgow Life in particular, and we did discuss along with Netball Scotland the implications of not being in the league. Our focus and our resource tends to go into the national team competing internationally and the related age group teams. But I agree with you, it's another opportunity that we would, of course, love to see. Ultimately, it's a resource issue. It's a very, very costly league to be part of, and I know a number of the English-based teams also withdrew when the new franchise was put together.
I suppose just added to that, is there some things that we can do more locally? Just I'm so aware that women and girls do participate in netball, but then we lose them. So I suppose maybe some work in trying to support netball at that community level might be helpful.
Absolutely, and I don't have the exact figures here, but I know we make a reasonably substantial investment into Netball Scotland, and that investment is to put in place some development officers across Scotland to support netball clubs to grow and develop. And it's also another great example, netball adopting walking netball. It's been fantastically successful, so slightly older ladies coming back to maybe played netball as a youngster, coming back to netball through walking netball. It's been really, really successful. Again, it's an initiative we support through Netball Scotland.
That's lovely. Thank you very much for your time.
Can I ask to what extent Sport Scotland has oversight over youth football in Scotland?
I was at the football roundtable discussion just yesterday, and youth football is the next topic to be discussed through that football roundtable conversation. We work with the SFA, and our investment predominantly goes into women and girls football and community football. Youth football led by the SPFL clubs and the academy structure that sits with them. We don't tend to be involved in that level. It is a relatively small number of players that are in those SPFL academy programmes. The vast majority of youth football taking place in community football clubs across Scotland, and our investment and work with the SFA through their network of teams is how we support that.
Okay. So what authority or influence does Sport Scotland have to ensure that football academies are supporting the well-being of players and preparing them for life outside of football?
Our direct engagement in that would be limited.
Despite the fact that you give funding to the SFA?
Our funding to the SFA goes into community grassroots football and women and girls football. The academy programmes run by those SPFL trusts, funded predominantly by the SPFL, and the income it generates through media is something that we're not that close to.
So you'll be aware that the committee over various sessions has shown a lot of interest in particularly the welfare of young players. And in December last year, the Children and Young People's Commissioner in Scotland and the campaign group Real Grassroots filed complaints with the Competition and Marketing Authority concerning the Scottish football's treatment of young players. And the complaints state that the SFA and the SPFL rules restricting youth players' freedom to move between club academies violate UK competition law and may constitute economic exploitation of children and breach of players' human rights. So taking into account what you've said about you don't have a lot of involvement within that, has Sport Scotland taken an organisational position on the matter, and do you have any involvement in responding to those complaints?
We don't have a role in responding to the complaints. I think that sits with the SFA and the SPFL. I think that they need to respond to the complaints, and we haven't taken an organisational view that's been discussed at board round about this, no.
Why not?
I think it's predominantly because of the clarity of roles and responsibilities. So I think whilst we are trying to encourage the SFA and SPFL to make sure that they are giving it due attention, I think our investment in our controls, if you like, are around community grassroots football, and we are trying to influence from the bottom up to show that if you've got good examples of children and young people being well cared for in the community football space, that it can work and that they can continue to progress and develop, then that would be it's almost trying to do it by role modelling rather than by forcing them into any particular position. But we are obviously aware of the situation, and where we need to take a view on it, then obviously the board would be happy to do so, but thus far we have been able to leave it with the SFA to deal with.
So if you're looking to influence and role model, do you see a problem with the way that current system works?
I'm not that close to it. I do understand the academies programme and the way young people are contracted to those clubs, but it's not a matter that we've got close to. If it's something that obviously the committee feels as though we should be looking at, we can find out more information and speak to the SFA and probably more importantly the SPFL. As I mentioned just yesterday, the Football Round Table Committee, where all the different parts of football, if you like, real grassroots are there, supporters committees are there, the SFA are there, the SPFL Trust, Scottish Women's Football. So all different parts of football around that table. We are also invited to that. It's chaired by Marie Todd, and the next meeting is going to be talking about this very issue.
About this specific issue?
Well, sorry, I'd just be clear, it's going to talk about youth football, and I think the specific issue you're talking about is academies and those SPFL, so it will talk about youth football because the Real Grassroots organisation are rightly saying, can we focus on the vast majority of children playing football and discuss them rather than the very narrow group of children which are in academies. So but exactly how that agenda is constructed, how that's put together, I'm not sure.
Okay, so I'm a bit concerned there that that's the direction of travel, given the concerns that have been raised about this very specific group of children, predominantly boys, if not exclusively boys, over a number of years, and the concerns that have been raised at this committee by various organisations. Have you had discussions with the football authorities about this? Specifically?
No.
Okay, and do you have any plans to do so, given the complaints that have been raised with the CMA?
Well, I will pick up with the SFA and the SPFL and ask them for an update on this matter, yes.
Brian Whittle.
Thank you. Good morning. On this, but I have to declare an interest in. I have two grandsons in the academy at the moment, having a great time, I have to be said. But I think I was involved in the Health and Sport Committee last session when the SPFL and the SFA were brought in to two committees, both the Petitions Committee and the Health and Sport Committee, around the treatment of those in the academy. And you see, there's not a big number, but it actually is about 3,000. So I think it's a reasonable number. And of those 3,000, only 0.7% of them will ever, end up in football, which is fine. The problem is the way in which the other 99.3% are cut and cut adrift and treated. And surely there must be a link between the academy, the cut, and community football, where there should be a destination for all 100% of those footballers. I think that's really where I have got a concern as there's a disconnect, because the SPFL and the SFA, when we brought them in here, certainly did not take care or take enough care of those that were being cut. So I would urge Sport Scotland to consider what happens to those children who are in some cases quite brutally cut from the academy, and that surely Sport Scotland have a responsibility there to make sure there is a sports destination for them.
I would agree 100%, and I risk falling on personal experience, but I know a number of young people who have been in academies that are strongly linked to their community club, who have tried out in academies, been in academies, and then moved back to the community game. But I appreciate that's not always the case, and that transition back and forward can be a traumatic one, which I do understand that's the subject of the concern here, and we're very happy to go and speak to the SFA and the SPFL further and find out more about this and see what role we can play in that transition, because as we all know, progression in sport is great when you're going one direction, but when it doesn't quite go your way, then the most important thing, and the thing that would concern us most, is that people stay physically active and they find an opportunity to take part in sport at the right level and the right circumstances for them.
Andrew Cahani.
Thank you. I'd just like to circle back onto some questions. I suppose let's start with the most basic one. Do you think it is right that a child is owned by an entity?
No.
So if children shouldn't be owned by an entity, that is what's happening currently in academies. And you said that it's a very narrow group of children in academies. But those children will be our future Scottish football stars that we will hopefully watch at World Cups. You know, they bring a huge amount of joy to the country and the nation. And as Brian Whittle has said, there are very good examples of children prospering and enjoying themselves. But children are owned and have no freedom of movement, have no ability to continue playing football in different places. Surely that can't be right.
As I say, I've not got the level of detail to engage in that conversation or discussion. I agree with you that children should be free. The whole premise of my response to Mr Whittle was that I want to see people taking part in sport, and if there's any restrictions, contracts or otherwise, that are put in place which prevent children taking part in sport, then that's a bad thing.
Okay. And there are multiple people who have done podcasts and multiple people who have spoken about their experience within an academy setup. There's a young footballer in England, Miles Lewis-Skelly, whose mum is doing a lot for other parents who are part of the academy setup because it is so brutal. And there's lots of people who talk about significant loss of mental health when they're cut out of the system. As I suppose now is an important time to declare an interest as Queen's Park's former head of medicine. But there are clubs like Queen's Park that will then pick up these players and try to get them going. But is there a place for Sport Scotland to ensure that our children who are at the elite level don't end up with significant mental health issues based upon the sporting nature of being cut?
Yes, I think our role is to have these conversations with SFA and SPFL. The very nature of professional football clubs and the level of investment that they're dealing with and the government's arrangements on roles and responsibilities, I mean, they are bigger in all sorts of different ways than Sport Scotland is, but we have a leadership role and we will pick up with SFA and SPFL to have this conversation and find out more about the situation, the conversation we're having.
Thank you.
I've got to say, Mr Dunlop, I'm rather concerned by what I've heard this morning, that you'll have conversations that you're trying to influence, given that the issue that's been raised this morning has certainly come in front of this committee over several years and, as I say, several sessions, and that Sport Scotland hasn't already picked up on that. And given the complaint put into the CMA was December and we're now in March, that there hasn't been conversations yet. However, I would ask that when those conversations take place, if you could update the committee on what your position is, or Sport Scotland's position is, given the discussions that you've had then with SFA and SPFL. Paul Sweeney wants to come in here too with a supplementary.
Thank you, Convener. I just wanted to raise the issue of the Glasgow School of Sport at Billerstown Academy, which has been operating since 1999, currently has around 65 pupils, 40 of which attend the school from outside the Glasgow City Council area, which costs Glasgow City Council approximately £380,000 per annum to sustain pupils out with the local authority. They've recognised the cost pressures there and are proposing to close the school in 2026 and have closed new admissions last year. I believe they have engaged with Sport Scotland around a way forward for sustaining the school, but that has not been successful. I would just like to ask what your position is in relation to whether the school offers a valuable contribution to Scotland's elite sport development and what could potentially be done to try and broker a solution to sustain the school in the long term.
Yeah, we have been in conversation for some time with Glasgow Life, Glasgow City Council round about this issue. I've think the School of Sport was absolutely the right thing to do when it was established, but I think what's happened over the subsequent years is there's been quite significant progress in governing body investment and programmes and the approach to the development of youth sport across those Olympic, Commonwealth, Paralympic sports. As a former Chief Executive of Scottish Swimming, and I think almost half of the current students are swimmers, just less than half of them. As the former Chief Executive of Scottish Swimming, it was certainly our opinion and our position that a very strong Glasgow swim team working in partnership with the School of Sport was the way forward. And that's evolved quite significantly from when the school was set up to where it is now. So I do think things have changed. The cost to Glasgow, they've clearly documented that they don't feel as though that is sustainable given the percentage of Glasgow residents versus non-residents at the school. And I think what is now important is that those more detailed conversations about every single one of the young people who are currently in the school and about what's next for them and what's right for them take place. And that is what's happening now.
Has Sport Scotland been involved in any way in engagement with other local authorities about whether they can sustain the pupils who are currently attending the school there for the duration of their education, secondary education? Has there been any effort by Sport Scotland to be involved in that future planning for pupils that currently attend the school and potentially looking at whether the model should be sustained? From what I'm hearing from you, you suggest that the model is obsolete. Would that be correct?
I'm not saying the model's obsolete. I'm just saying that things have changed quite considerably since when it was first established. We've not engaged with other local authorities, but we do, through the Institute network, we are engaging with Glasgow, and with School of Sport staff to talk about where those young people are just now and what the future might hold for them.
Okay, thank you very much.
Emma Harper.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning to you. I'm interested in rural, island, remote support from Sport Scotland. Can you tell me what actions are being taken by Sport Scotland to support rural and remote and island sport to take place?
Yeah, I think it's really important for us to make sure that we are trying to ensure that children and young people and people of all ages are able to take part in activity right across the country, and particularly in the rural communities. There are a number of initiatives that have been put in place in order to support particularly athletes who are involved in travelling. So there's an Athlete Travel Award to encourage them to be able to have some mitigation in terms of the cost of travelling and competing in particular. It's about trying to work with the local authorities in the more rural areas to make sure that they have got the mechanisms in place to support the clubs. Forbes mentioned earlier the strong clubs, and I think you find very strong clubs in the rural communities, and we're working with governing bodies to make sure that those clubs are well supported and able to make the best use of the resources they have available. Sport Scotland have invested just over £1 million in the preparations for the Orkney hosting of the Island Games, and that was about trying to make sure that the facilities in Orkney would both be ready and helpful for the games to be held in Orkney, but also that the people in Orkney had facilities of quality that then would be sustained beyond simply hosting the games, and that creates a better infrastructure for sport and participation. It is really about trying to work with local partners to make sure that the best resources are available. I'm not sure if Forbes to add anything.
I think Maureen's covered that well. I was in Shetland at the end of last year. I've had a couple of visits up to Orkney as part, as Maureen says, our commitment to the Island Games and significant new investment to support, most importantly, the long-term facility provision in Orkney. It's interesting, when I was in Shetland speaking to some of the volunteers and the staff in Shetland, they talked about hosting the Island Games almost 20 years ago, the impact that had, the facilities that were built back then and how they were being used and utilised by local club and community groups, and we very much expect and hope something similar in Orkney to happen.
Is there a regional or rural urban variation as to what sports people pick up? Because in Stranraer and Dumfries, we've got Olympic and world-class curling, and we've got ice hockey team that's always Sharks in Dumfries, the women and the men, but they have to play in England because it's easier and closer to get to Sheffield, and there's teams there where there aren't teams in Scotland. And then there's other things like Stranraer are developing a water sports hub, which is great because we'll have people on the water, paddleboarding and sea kayaking. I've done it myself down there. It's amazing and it's really good for your mental health as well. So is there a regional aspect to what gets funded or what, based on what sport is taken up?
I don't think it's so much about a regional approach coming from us down the way. It's actually about what comes up the way. So I think you've given lots of facility-specific examples. So if there is a particular physical facility nearby that draws children and young people in, and I think the other magic ingredient is the coaching. So where you've got inspirational leaders who are great at bringing together groups of young people and indeed can sustain a sports club, then you find that those sports thrive. And if you look across the country, there are pockets of particular sports that are stronger in different parts of the country. And when you look at the history and heritage behind that, it's largely down either to the location and creation of a facility, as you've described, but supported very much by a strong club infrastructure that makes that the most viable. So it's not that we would necessarily say Stranraer should have ice sports and the water sports that you've exampled, but the nature of the fact that those facilities are there, and you look at the history and heritage behind that, is very much around the creation of the club and community that has come around, and that's where children and young people generally go to sports that are local to them. And how local that is could vary, but it is very much around getting your first experience will usually be one that's relatively local, and that would then pull you into to sustain activity in that sport.
Okay, all right. And I know that Sport Scotland have invested, I think it's £424,000 to Dumfries and Galloway Council for Active Schools programme, community sports hubs and community cycling and coaching as well, because we've got 5 of the 7 Staines in Dumfries and Galloway, so that's a whole, cycling is a whole another sport that is able to be accessed as well. So, and I think Sport Scotland has supported the facilities as well. I'm also interested in the research that is underway to understand the barriers faced by people in island communities and remote places because of transport and travel, and you've mentioned that, Maureen, about getting people some support. So there's research being undertaken right now to look at what the barriers are for remote and rural. So can you tell us when the research is going to be published, or when it's going to be completed first, and then will it be published?
I'll be honest, I don't know the specific research. I need to find that out. I didn't know we were conducting that research. My apologies. I need to check exactly whether that's been done by us or been done more locally. What I can say is, and I think it's a particularly good example, our young people sports panel, who we recruit from across Scotland, including island communities, they've done some really good work in the last couple of years about the barriers, particularly faced by young people in island communities. We support then travel schemes and grants. It doesn't cover the cost by any stretch of the imagination what individuals and families face, but it's a contribution, and we, as I say, regularly go to the island communities, engage with clubs, leaders, groups there to say what more can we do. But on that specific research, I'm sorry, I've not got. I didn't know we were doing that. If we do, it's not quite got to me yet. Apologies.
Okay. Just one final wee question. I'm meeting Scottish Rugby on Thursday, and Six Nations is on right now, and it's pretty exciting watching it. But I'm meeting Scottish Rugby with a specific focus on girls in rugby, because you can be any body shape and have a position on the rugby field, so it's absolutely fab. Does Sport Scotland work with Scottish Rugby to basically work together to collaborate and promote and engage so that more young women can play rugby?
Yeah, it was interesting when we had Scottish Rugby come to present to us at the Sport Scotland boards in, I think that was during 2023. One of the facts that they identified was that the fastest growing membership side of Scottish Rugby was in the women's game. And so they're seeing a huge level of take-up in terms of interest in girls and women getting involved. So we are very much encouraging them to continue to do that, and there is a programme that is supported.
Okay, thanks.
Gillian Mackay.
Thanks, Convener, and good morning to the panel. Does Sport Scotland collect data on the socio-economic status of people who participate in sporting activities, both those who actually do the sport themselves, but also the volunteers? And if so, what does this data show?
We do through our annual returns from governing bodies and through the programmes that we run directly or invest in directly, and it won't be a surprise to the committee to show that those people living in lower socio-economic areas take part less in sport. There is one programme that we invest heavily in and we're very proud of, which balances that out, which is our Active Schools programme, and we see no difference in the Active Schools take-up or participation rates, but we know generally across sport that that it's definitely an impact.
Given that gap that we have, how can Sport Scotland work with local authorities, or how does Sport Scotland work with local authorities as well, to ensure that access to physical activity is effectively integrated into broader public health and anti-poverty strategies?
The new the new Physical Activity for Health framework, which was launched last autumn, we're now working with 13 local authorities using that framework to look at all 8 investment areas, recognising that physical activity and people being physically active, sport's one strand of that, active travel's a strand, education and the education and active schools places are a strand of that. So we're using that framework to work with now. We're with 13 local authorities to talk to them about their sport, their physical activity strategies and how that connects through their community planning partnerships. So that on a planning front, that's what we're doing. I think at a more operational level, I know most of local authorities and or leisure trusts will have schemes which do support do provide subsidies, support for people living in areas of deprivation to access sports facilities. But ultimately, this is a cost issue and a cost barrier. And in my opening remarks, I talked about access to facilities. We know the costs of running those facilities are going up, so we know the price to access those facilities are going up, and we know that all that will do over a period of time is continue to open up that gap and that divide.
What work is Sport Scotland doing with governing bodies to reduce that cost of participation, particularly for children and young people who want to get involved in club sport outside of school? Because that obviously cost of equipment is a huge barrier to some, and will also probably prevent some families from being able to continue that physical activity outside of school.
Yeah, again, we have a number of. It was an initiative that was developed by our Young People Sports panel a few years ago, where and it's become, I think, almost quite trendy now. This using second-hand clothing, recycling kits. So there's a lot of that going on. The initiative was developed by our Young People Sports panel, and that's now in sports leisure centres across Scotland, where there's bins, buckets where you can put stuff in and it can be recycled and reused. I would, however, want to be clear, I think that's very good and I'm sure it is helpful, but it doesn't remove some of the financial barriers and constraints that you're referring to. And we all know what they are, and ultimately it comes down to the majority of the time the cost of running facilities, which we know is going up and it's harder and harder, and it's very hard for governing bodies who in the main do not owner, manager, run those facilities to therefore remove the cost. They're locally run and managed in the majority of cases.
I think there are a number of sports clubs that are running localised, very club-specific schemes in order to try to make sure that where cost is a barrier, there is a mechanism put in place either to give them reduced or free membership, certainly for a period of time, in order to try to encourage those children, say, coming out of an active schools programme, in order to try to sustain their participation in the club. But there's no getting away from the fact that taking part in sport is quite expensive, and therefore trying to make it as affordable as possible is very much on the mind of club organisers. And again, many clubs are doing a lot of fundraising activity in order to mitigate the cost to the individual participant, so that the club as a whole is generating fundraising activities to sustain them.
On that very specific point that Forbes just raised about local facilities and locally run facilities, we're seeing a lot of facilities becoming part of community asset transfers, and local authorities looking to offload some of these assets. One in my region in particular is Grangemouth Stadium, which I know Scottish Athletics are involved in. What support, practical support, if not financial, can Sport Scotland give some of these teams who are potentially, or governing bodies like Scottish Athletics, who are looking to take over and get involved in having to run some of these venues to keep them there for the groups that participate in them?
Yeah, we work very closely in the particular example that you mentioned, working very closely with Scottish Athletics and Falkirk Council to try and find the right solution, a solution which doesn't burden Scottish Athletics with a facility that needs significant investment over the next 5-10 years. I think it would be wrong to burden Scottish Athletics with that ongoing bill without the right balance and support coming from the local authority as well. So we are engaged in these conversations. We're seeing an increasing number of facilities being transferred to community groups and clubs, and we're also seeing some brilliant examples of that happening, where local clubs are taking over the management, the booking, the opening, the closing, the day-to-day running of facilities. And when that's happening, we're seeing increased usage, more people getting through the facilities, a better use of the facilities. So we're involved with lots of excellent examples. I think we just need to be mindful that we don't burden small organisations like governing bodies. They are pretty small organisations with the running of facilities, particularly when those facilities we know need significant investment over the next period of time.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you. Joe Fitzpatrick.
Thanks very much. I was wanting to continue the theme about inclusivity in sport, particularly looking at people with disabilities, and maybe give you the opportunity to talk about the work that you're doing to encourage sports to make their offer more inclusive to a wider range. I know there's some sports doing fantastic work, but we still see less people with disabilities involved in all sports.
I think it's again, it is one of our priorities is to make sport fully inclusive. I think the work that governing bodies have done with the support of Scottish Disability Sport, which is the overarching governing body for disability sport, has really been about making adjustments and amendments, making the activity accessible, making changes to how the game is played and how it is set up. I think having the Paralympics on television has been a real encouragement to is that if you can see it, you can be it, then actually that's bringing lots of young people into to the fray in terms of wanting to get involved. I think, again, sports clubs are very good at integrating, and in Scotland we really have a very inclusive approach, and we are working to support governing bodies who are in turn supporting their membership clubs to make sure that they're running inclusive clubs where that's feasible and practical to do so. There are still clubs, disability clubs, which by definition are best suited to be delivered in that way, but it is really about trying to make sure that we're promoting the excellent work that goes on, and that we're supporting the coaching infrastructure to make sure that these coaches and leaders are able to ensure that they give the best possible experience. It's really important that quality PE, to be able to take a good physical literacy relative to their capability, and we're really working hard with the governing bodies to make sure that that happens. Forbes might want to add.
I think it's the ambition of Scottish Disability Sport and what they've been working towards and we've been supporting is that their vision, their view is that every governing body in Scotland should be fully inclusive. So Scottish Swimming should take care of all aspects of swimming for everyone, and we would completely agree. And there's a number of different governing bodies and different stages and places on that journey, but SDS, Scottish Disability Sports, vision and their direction and a lot of the funding we give them is to get governing bodies into that position to be fully responsible, and we think that's right. It's all based round about the Scottish Disability Sport inclusion model that recognises that sometimes the very best thing is for full integration, sometimes the best thing for the individual and the participant is to have a disability specific club because that meets their needs better. So the inclusion model that Scottish Disability Sport have developed, I think it's been an excellent piece of work, and it's something we fully support and endorse across all sports. We've also done a piece of work over the last couple of years with Enable Scotland, which has been a new piece of work, a new partnership with us, but it's been really interesting, a lot of learning coming from that. And that's about working with young people with a learning disability and creating placements for them to work in Scottish governing bodies, not just in governing bodies, actually there's a couple working with local partners, but predominantly in governing bodies. And the learning that's coming from that's also been significant. Sorry, back to SDS, I know they also do quite a bit of work with PE teachers, so their disability inclusion module, they've worked really hard to work with universities, so when teachers are coming through their teacher education programme, SDS are delivering some of that inclusion training. And also just because I was there last week, you know, we hosted the World Wheelchair Curling Championships. It's still ongoing actually. I was down last week, a fantastic event for Scotland to host in a sport of which we're particularly strong at over the years.
Thank you very much. You've just taken down a couple of my notes, both of you. So I had written down here, can't be what you can't see, and I'd mentioned, and the reason I'd written down curling was because of the competition that's ongoing. And I think there is a point there for the media, because I don't think most people would know that curling competition was going on. I knew about it because the Sports Minister, Marie Todd, told me just how exciting it was and how amazing. And I think it's maybe not a call for yourselves, but a call to the media to recognise just how amazing disability sports have become and what great entertainment they can be. And you know, we really need the media to step up. And just like they're doing for women's sport, it's much better coverage. We need to get better coverage for disability sports so as young disabled people can see the opportunity they have and work out what's going to work for them, get involved in sport and get that buzz, and we can all get a buzz from it as well if it's on the telly.
I think having good coverage of all of the sports that are what might be classified as minority sports, predominantly Olympic, Paralympic and Commonwealth sports, they don't get enough media coverage across the mainstream media. And so for us, we are constantly working to try to support governing bodies to make sure that they have got the right package, that they give the media the information so that there is the opportunity to make sure the media is informed. Like Forbes, I was down at the wheelchair curling last week and I was sitting next to some local residents who had come in, hadn't seen wheelchair curling before, came along because it was on their doorstep and really enjoyed it and were coming back to future sessions. So it is that ability to expose people to new opportunities, to new ideas, and Auchenharvey Leisure Centre hosting a World Championship is a great opportunity for people to see a sport at a very high standard, and we want to encourage that to happen right across the country.
Sorry, we might well come on to it, but I think it's a great opportunity with the Commonwealth Games and the number of para events that are integrated into the Commonwealth Games. That's been one of the things Commonwealth Games movement's done over the past 2 or 3 cycles, and I know the Glasgow programme has significant para events fully integrated into the Games model in 2026.
We will come on to Commonwealth Games. Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Convener. I think we'll probably be pretty aligned with most of what the questions I'm about to ask around the impact of physical activity on health, both on physical health and on mental health. I think it's obvious that the nation's physical and mental health has declined and is on a decline. And at the same time, we have a decline in physical literacy. My concern in sport at the moment is that access to sport, very much around the socio-economic inequality stuff, is that those sport, especially at a higher level, seems to be moving much more towards the middle class, much more towards private education, and it's really how do we tackle that, because it is part of Sport Scotland's remit around the health of the nation. And it strikes me as we do have delivery mechanisms here. We have 1,140 hours of free childcare. And as you know, the physical literacy stuff really happens preschool. The cardiovascular system, neuromuscular system, bone density is all pretty much done by the time they get to school. But we have them for 1,140 hours, so there's an opportunity there. Into primary school, again, I think if we talked earlier on about gender inequality, that inequality tends not to happen at the younger age group. They're much more open to that. But we have primary schools, we in the last 10 years, 43% reduction in PE specialists in primary schools, and into secondary school, we have sort of decimation of extracurricular activity. And that lack of, I think, a link to community sport. So we've got all the pieces of the jigsaw, in my view. What are Sport Scotland doing to try and, get governments to see the picture of the jigsaw, what we're trying to achieve here? Because for me, we have all the pieces of the jigsaw. We're just not putting it together.
I think what we're trying to do is to keep the jigsaw together and to make sure that everyone is aligned in terms of where the priorities are and how best to engage and support physical activity. We want to be an active Scotland. We want to make sure everyone can take part and can benefit from sport, and you identify both the physical and mental health benefits that we all understand to be there. We know that it is a long-term game and that we need to make sure that we continue to encourage and support people to be active. We've had active schools for 20 years this year, and so it is about looking at that generational change that we can see that, as you've identified, when we get young people engaged through active schools, they manage to sustain that participation through their school journey. And what we're now seeing is a generation who hopefully will continue that through their young adult life and therefore into adulthood. So I think it is about us continuing to advocate on behalf of everyone to understand the benefits of sport, both physically and mentally, and to continue to seek to align resources and to align partnerships for the best possible outcome. Everyone is under tight pressures of all the resources that you'll hear regularly in this chamber, but I think sport really does have the opportunity to bind people together, and the voluntary input that underpins the club infrastructure in Scotland, I think, is part of the opportunity for us to try to keep that aligned and to keep it well supported to achieve the benefits that we're all trying to get.
If I could add, I've mentioned a couple of times the Physical Activity for Health framework launched last autumn, and for me that's a critical piece of work which must be driven centrally, applied locally absolutely, but must be driven centrally, because what that work does, and it's based on research from around the world, but what that work does is it recognises all the different component parts that are required to have a more physically active nation. So our absolute responsibility is, of course, for sport, and that's an important part of it, but that work also recognises the active transport networks that need to be in place. It recognises the role of communication and messaging at a national level and a local level about the importance of physical activity. So we've got a role to play in that, and through that Physical Activity for Health framework and the strategic group that sits below that, where Public Health Scotland are on that group, Education Scotland are on the group, COSLA around that table. we need to, as national organisations and bodies, continue to work together to deliver against the population health stuff that I absolutely agree with you. We are doing a lot of specific interventions that we take complete responsibility for. Maureen's mentioned the Active Schools work. We also have a very successful partnership with SAMH. I know they're here tomorrow night. Actually, it's something that we're really proud of over the years. We have worked closely with SAMH. We've invested in SAMH, who in turn have delivered mental health awareness training to every Active Schools coordinator, to our Community Sport Hub officer, to any other member of the professional workforce, if you like, in Scotland. And we know, as a direct result of that, the awareness and the confidence and the conversations that are happening as a result is definitely impacting people's lives. So we've got some direct interventions that we do. We've got a role to play and a contribution to play against that physical activity for health framework. And I would absolutely agree with you, the preschool setting, school setting is a place where we could and should always aspire to do more. That's when we need to get to young people, and we need to get to them more and get them more active in that setting.
Good plug for the SAMH event tomorrow night, since I'm hosting it. But I think, again, I'm going back to this, is that in the Active Schools network, I think, at the moment I think it's quite patchy, but I think it's a really good delivery mechanism. And it's been one of the big problems with it was around, the extracurricular angle of it and how kids get home afterwards. But we've now got free bus travel, so we've taken that away. So I think it's things like, how do we connect up Active Schools and what we teach in Active Schools to community, so that there is a pathway, and how do we, as I said, with all the good work that you're trying to do, the reality is physical literacy in the country is on a significant decline, and I say that as a coach of 30 years, watching the kids that come to me and how we have to go back, further and further back in that literacy journey to get them ready to participate in sport. So it's how do we connect up Active Schools to community? I think that's massively important. And how do we utilise delivery mechanisms like the 1140 hours to have that active play that starts to teach our kids again that physical literacy? Because you're right that local facilities are closing all over the place and they're under extreme pressure. But in this instance, potentially we still have a delivery mechanism that's not fully utilised. And I would add on top of that, just as a question, in terms of utilising the school estate, do we have an audit of all the facilities that actually could be available that are currently not being fully utilised?
Just a couple of points. So I think it's important, and I know this is definitely not what you're suggesting, but Active Schools was always meant to be complementary and additional to good quality physical education in school, and I think that's really important. And we're working closely with Education Scotland across a number of the different reviews they're doing into education, and tapping into that health and wellbeing strand, which has always been there as part of the curriculum for excellence, and saying it's absolutely critical that good quality physical education happens in school, and Active Schools is there to complement and add to that rather than replace it. The school club links is a target area within Active Schools, but I believe we could do much more in that area. I think Active Schools risks trying to be everything to everyone. Those young people in schools who are already quite active members of schools clubs quite often are the ones who turn up to Active School sessions, and we need to be quite focused with our Active Schools network that what we're trying to do is get less active young people more engaged. So there's a piece of work to be done in there. We haven't looked at the preschool piece, and it's something that we can look at, but we haven't to date looked at the preschool piece of the jigsaw. And finally, on your last piece round about the school estate, that will be captured as part of our facilities review that I mentioned in the opening remarks that we're starting just now. So it will look at community facilities, it will look at the education estate, it'll give a full picture of what's out there, and also, importantly, it'll talk about how well it's being used, because I think we all recognise that there is maybe a need for some rationalisation of that estate, but we need a very clear picture of it in the first instance.
I appreciate your angle on active schools to support PE, but just as an aside, I think PE should align itself with community as well. I don't see the point of doing 6 weeks of basketball, getting kids really enthusiastic about basketball, and then moving on to something else, and there's no outlet for them to move on to. I think that there's a disconnect here. If I can move on to I was at an event. A sort of social enterprise yesterday that's it's phenomenal. Climbing, they do use a big climbing wall in a church in Kilmarnock, and they've moved into outdoor canoeing and all sorts of stuff, and that is for people in recovery. And it's not teaching people sport; it's teaching people through sport. It's bringing people together. It's creating that sort of confidence, resilience, that whole aspiration thing, and that sort of group activity. And that to me is investing in health, investing in instead of not just things like recovery beds and needle exchange and all that kind of stuff. What we're actually doing there is giving them a different direction. And that for me is something that's not understood particularly well. They're, like many other organisations like them and sports organisations, and like yourself, under extreme financial pressure. Do you think government understand the impact that sport can have in community, not just for the sake of sport, but education through sport? And are we doing enough to promote that?
That's one of the key things that, as a board, Sport Scotland talks about on an almost every single meeting, has that at the heart of it, in terms of how do we make sure that we are advocating for the value of sport, both for physical and mental health, for economic value and for community cohesion value, because so many of the projects that we all know about really actually lie at the heart of community cohesion and engagement, bringing people in, whether it's a walking group or a mental health group or the example you give of climbing and outdoor activities. So for us it's about trying to get that point across, and I think it's a continual job to continue to convince everyone that everyone recognises the value of it, but finds it difficult to prioritise it in terms of funding decisions. So I think we are continuing to press all funders to recognise the value and importance of what's there, but everyone's living in constrained times, and we need to be realistic about what's achievable. But I think I've not come across anyone who doesn't believe investment in sport and physical activity actually gives a positive return. And so I think everyone is sympathetic to it, but doesn't necessarily have the leverage to unlock the resources that perhaps we would like to see.
If everybody is so, and I agree with you, but I would say if everybody is so in agreement with that, why do we keep cutting the budget is where I am. Because when I spoke to the people yesterday who are users of that particular facility, who are recovering from all sorts of addictions and whatnot, the cost of that treatment, if it wasn't that, would be exponentially more than that. And that's the point that's obviously not getting picked up. So I'll ask the question, do you think sport is an easy option when it comes to cutting?
I don't think it's an easy option, but I think it's perhaps the legal frameworks that and we don't want to be bogged down in legal frameworks and statutory responsibilities, but I think it's about where does the statutory protection. So when you look at other parts of services that do get protected, they have a statutory framework that's much more detailed than the one we live in. We like the framework we've got because it gives us flexibility, but actually if you had fewer choices because of statutory requirements, then you would make different choices. So I think it's about us trying to make sure that we make the best case possible. And as I think people are very supportive of sport and physical activity and the benefits that come from it.
But unfortunately with that framework you're having less and less investment from central government, which means you have less and less ability to invest. The model's not working for me. I mean, you'll not be surprised that I think we should be investing much more heavily in this sort of activity, but it's not working, obviously.
I think it's the local pressures are probably the greatest. I think our budget has been moderate in terms of reductions and small increases from time to time, but the pressure is very much at the local authority level where the largest resources are under the greatest amount of pressure.
Although you're £10 million less than when I came in here. Okay.
Thank you. Emma Harper.
It's just to pick up on that. I mean, it's not necessarily Sports Scotland's responsibility to do that wide sweep of physical activity out there, because yesterday I was at the convention of South of Scotland and we focused on transport, and it was about getting folk on their bikes to the bus or on their bikes to a train, but there seemed to be not a lot of, okay, can I hang my bike on the train somewhere or the bus, you know, and it's about all of these agencies collaborating and working together. So that's not a Sports Scotland responsibility. That is what you're saying, Maureen, as local authorities working together, collaboration, getting out of silos and things like that. Because, you know, we've had lung health choirs singing here. So that's physical activity, but it's not Sports Scotland's remit. And the lung health choirs, the people that have performed, say that they're so much more physically able because of how singing helps their lung health, right, if they've got chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So I'm just interested in your thoughts around that. It is a wider issue, that it's not just your responsibility. That's my point. It's about everybody collaborating and working together to look at improving physical activity for folk in Scotland.
Absolutely is, and I think Forbes referenced the physical activity for health framework. So when you look at that framework, it covers all of those dimensions, and so it is about us trying to encourage everyone to be more active, whether it's singing in the choir or walking to the bus stop. You know, so it is about us trying to encourage people to be aware of the physical value, but our job is to make sure that people are taking part in sport, and we want to encourage participation in sport and physical activity. But you're right, there's a range of players right across the piece, which is why I think it's helpful the physical activity for health framework is articulated in the way that it is, because it makes it clear there's a whole range of players that need to be involved for us to successfully deliver an Active Scotland.
Okay, thanks.
Santosh Gohani.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to the 26 Commonwealth Games, which is in my home city of Glasgow, and I'm absolutely confident the sun will be shining. I'm more confident that Glaswegians will be embracing the Games. What role will Sports Scotland play in preparation for and delivery of the 26 Games?
There's probably two aspects to this. First and foremost, the role we always play with Team Scotland. So we invest in Commonwealth Games Scotland and in turn the preparation of Team Scotland, so that we know Scottish athletes turn up at the Games in the best condition, with the best preparation and the best, ultimately giving them the best opportunity to perform. And our conversations with Commonwealth Games Scotland are ongoing exactly as to what we invest in and how we invest it. Our colleagues in the Sports Scotland Institute of Sport play a big part of that, so our medical team, our physio team, our scientists, medicine team all work with the Games athletes on an ongoing basis, but particularly as we go into the Games. The second strand to that is we're working closely with the organising committee and with Glasgow around about the venues. 3 out of the 4 venues being ones that we've invested in significantly in the past, and that we know there is capital investment and works required in preparation for the Games. But really importantly for us, a wee bit like the Orkney example I gave earlier, we want to make sure that any of that money, any of that new money, is well invested, not just to deliver a Games time experience, but to leave a long-term impact for clubs, communities and athletes in Glasgow and beyond. So there's a couple of strands to our work, Team Scotland, but also working with the delivery team. We actually also we welcomed the Glasgow 2026 delivery team into our offices in Templeton, so we share an office with them just now, which just on a very practical level is helpful to have ongoing conversations. They're quite a new team, they're having to get up to speed really quickly, and we've got quite a lot of internal knowledge and experience which we can help them with, and being in the same building is definitely helpful for that.
Thank you. And I'm going to come on to legacy, but obviously we're aware that we got the games rather late, and there are sports that are going to miss out. Diving, hockey, cricket, to name a few. I've certainly been contacted by a lot of sports wanting to come in, and we understand why, because it was so late in the day that we got it. But what measures are being taken to support excluded sports to prevent potential disadvantages?
The first thing that we've done is we'd already invested in the sports that we expected to be in the Australian Games. So we'd already committed, we commit our investment in principle in a 4-year cycle. So they had been, our investment had been committed, and we've not taken away any of that investment. So a sport like hockey, whilst it would previously been in and now it's not, we haven't removed investment from those sports. So we've done what we can to leave the investment on the table for them to then explore other competitive opportunities. What we can't replace for them is the profile that comes with the Commonwealth Games. So of course Scottish Hockey will go and compete in other international fixtures, but what they won't get is the profile that they would get as being a Commonwealth Games. So we've not taken the investment away. We continue to work with every one of those sports as to what our alternative plans are and support them where we can. But I completely understand, both for the sports but also for those individual athletes that would have been their home games that they're not now able to take part in. I do understand completely the disappointment.
Okay. Turning to legacy, evaluation of the 2014 Games showed limited improvement in population-level health, physical activity and sports participation. So what can Sport Scotland do, or are doing, to ensure that this does not happen again?
I don't think hosting the 26 Games in Glasgow in just over a year's time is going to see a particular uptick in physical activity levels or health of the nation. I don't think that £120 million investment into that particular Games is going to see it, given the context of everything else we've talked about today. I think some of the more stubborn and substantial challenges that sit at a local and national level are the things that would need to change, and conscious of reference a number of times, but that physical activity for health framework and the evidence that sits behind that is really, really clear that by hosting the Commonwealth Games, if you don't have all these other pillars firing up and working towards a similar outcome of a more active nation, then you're unlikely to deliver. Now, that's not to say that there won't be some very positive impacts of the 26 Games, and I know a number of the governing bodies who are involved in the Games, they're having conversations about how they can maximise and take the opportunity that the profile from home Games will give them. Whether that has an impact at a population level, I think, is questionable.
Okay. Certainly, just in the previous answer you gave me, you spoke about the fact that Sport Scotland is going to be looking at getting sort of more long-term impact. So what type of things would you be doing to get that long-term impact?
Our particular focus and conversation that we've been having over the past number of months with the board is that we firmly believe that we need to free up and attract as much new resource as we possibly can to invest in club and community groups, into volunteers who are running sport on a day-to-day basis across Scotland. That needs to be, we believe, not our sole focus, but an absolute focus for what we do. We do risk at times when resources are tight, we do risk trying to do a little bit of everything for everyone. And we believe through the conversations, discussions, debates we've had with board and the evidence and the detail that we've taken to board and gone through that we need to be more focused on club and community sport to show value and to support those volunteers who are supporting those 800,000 plus people to be involved in clubs. Very, very importantly, and this is a journey we've been on for the last 4 or 5 years, definitely maybe longer, is that those clubs and community groups and organisations need to understand and need to be more inclusive. They can't continue to just work with the same groups of people they have, and I think we've seen progress in that.
Okay, my final question, just on this freeing up and attracting new resources. The Emirates Arena was built for the 2014 Games, and it's going to be hosting cycling in the 26 Games. Glasgow Life faces a £108 million shortfall, and yet the £5 million naming rights has now expired, and so it's no longer the Emirates Arena. So what help can Sport Scotland give to facilitate sponsorship, given the profile of the 26 Games that are coming, to try to put more money into these local communities that you just spoke about?
I mean, the specifics around about sponsorship across all aspects of sport have been lots and lots of discussion and debate in that area. And when you look across all but a few sports now in the UK, once you move away from football and rugby, golf to an extent, there is very, very little sponsorship at any significant level happening in sport. That's across the big Olympic and Paralympic sports. British or UK athletics, British swimming in the past have attracted reasonably big sponsorship deals. The vast majority of those have now gone. And so we do work very closely with Glasgow. I was with Glasgow Life last week. We talked about their entire facilities estate, swimming pools, hockey centre, their pitch strategy. So we work very closely with them on the strategy and the provision and how that develops and evolves. But the specifics round about supporting them with sponsorship around about Emirates isn't something that we've discussed with them.
Okay.
Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Convener. Appreciate the feedback on the planning for the Commonwealth Games. Just wanted to also pick up on the legacy point, particularly the opportunity for development in capital facilities which are currently not utilised. So, for example, at Whitehill Pool in the city's Denniston district, which is quite close to Tollcross International Swimming Centre, has been closed since December 2023 due to rack concrete, displacing a number of local clubs, including ones that focus on people with disabilities. Just wonder whether the Sport Scotland has engaged with the organising committee of the 26 Games and indeed the Commonwealth Games Federation about what capital investment opportunities there are to ensure the facilities, and particularly the deprived parts of Glasgow, can be repaired in time for a legacy proposition for the Commonwealth Games.
The conversation I have had, and I've specifically had conversations around about Whitehill and the challenges there, have been with Glasgow Life. As part of the work they've done an audit of swimming pools in Glasgow. The organising committee and the funding model that was agreed with the Commonwealth Games Federation specifically, and the capital monies within that were specifically targeted at the 4 venues which will be used to host and deliver the Games, rather than the wider facility estate. And those discussions, negotiations, agreements, I think are concluded, and as I say, have been absolutely focused on the Games venues, but that wider facility estate in Glasgow is an ongoing conversation that we're having with Glasgow Life.
That's great. Also just wanted to ask about one of the core venues for the Commonwealth Games, which is Scotstoun Stadium. Obviously the main tenants of the stadium presently are Glasgow Warriors, and they are looking to develop the facilities there. I wonder if there is any discussion around how the capital investments at the stadium can assist in a longer-term legacy for rugby development for Glasgow Warriors in particular at Scotstoun Stadium.
Yeah, absolutely. We're involved in those conversations and the discussions, and we're also trying to find the right solutions to protect athletics at that venue. It's an important venue for Scottish athletics as well, and previously in the committee we talked about Grangemouth and Grangemouth Athletic Stadium, so there's a really important link between a number of these projects, and it's absolutely our responsibility to make sure we protect and support the needs for not only rugby but athletics, and we're involved in those conversations and having those discussions to try and find the right long-term solutions and not a solution focused solely on delivering the games.
And has there been any discussion with the Scottish Events Campus company in relation to their planned expansion of the facilities there and how that can support a legacy for the games?
That's not something I'm familiar with, no, but I can find out more about that, but it's not something that I'm familiar with.
No problem. I also just wanted to quickly turn to point earlier about equalities and access to sport and equity of access to sport as a legacy potentially of the Commonwealth Games. It was raised as a concern, I believe, at the Sport Scotland November board meeting around strategies to engage key groups such as BAME children experiencing poverty, and it was highlighted that there were challenges in identifying specific students within schools, and that there could be better use of data to target support and remove barriers, including financial assistance. I just wonder if the Commonwealth Games could offer an opportunity to enrich the data picture for engaging young people, particularly from deprived backgrounds, ethnic minority backgrounds, through the prism of the Commonwealth Games, and perhaps allowing to build those relationships, and given particularly Glasgow has the most ethnically diverse population in Scotland.
Yep, absolutely, and that work sits with our core relationship partnership with Glasgow Life. That's the type of conversation we're having with Glasgow Life, and using the data and the insight that we have through our Active Schools team in Glasgow, the data and the insight with the Community Sport Hub team with Glasgow, and we're looking at a couple of other new initiatives actually with Glasgow, live conversations with them, and for me the opportunity is that with the Commonwealth Games coming round, we will have the spotlight on sport again, and it's important when the spotlight's on sport that we celebrate our fantastic Scottish athletes, who I'm sure will do very well, but we also talk about some of the challenges and the access issues and those who don't have the same opportunities within sport. So using the Commonwealth Games as an opportunity to have these conversations in more public arenas and more people listen and engage in the conversation, I think is really important.
Are there any ideas around how that might evolve? Is it engagement with the charities that work with more deprived communities? Is it engagement with the schools specifically? Is there a sort of emerging idea of how that might be developed?
There's a range. There's definitely the school work, which is ongoing. That's something we would see as work in progress, work that we've been involved in for a long period of time and will continue. And there's a new piece of work emerging, which is how we better engage with community groups, some of them charitable organisations, but community groups serving some of those areas of deprivation, ethnically diverse communities within Glasgow. There's ongoing conversations about that with Glasgow Life, and I do feel as though we've got some solutions and some new investment and some new partnerships coming through. We're just not quite at the stage of firming that up, but it's work in progress and really not far away.
Other particular pockets of
for one final question from Brian Whittle.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me in again, Convener. Just on the legacy, it just strikes me as looking back at 2014, one of the things that was really successful was the Athletics Club Together programme. I know that was going to be, we looked at mirroring that in swimming and cycling. Just for the committee, that's an investment into 15 hours of professional help in a club that was paid for by sponsor, club, local council, and it was their job to try and look at how we recruit. And that was very measurable, because over that period of time we get an extra 3,000 people involved in all aspects of that. So, is it that kind of model? Is that worth revisiting and looking how we could expand that?
I think the governing bodies are getting really good at understanding how do they try to capitalise on an event coming to their area. So understanding what worked well in 2014, 2018 and indeed in 2023. So I think it's about them taking these examples to say we need to be ready. We know that the influx of children and young people is going to come on the back of, so we need to not wait till September, October, November. We need to be ready in June and July when we're starting to talk about these things. So I think the Club Together model is a really good example, but there are others, and I think each of the governing bodies in the Commonwealth Games wants to be ready to capitalise on on the interest that is going to come from that, from children and young people who have perhaps not already been engaged in that sport, to make sure that there are opportunities there, but also that the clubs are ready with the pathway to support those children who want to not just come and try for a day, but actually to sustain it right through a period of participation.
Absolutely. I think the work that Scottish Athletics did there was excellent. Scottish Swimming did some very similar things. Sport Scotland has run a direct club investment programme for a period of time, and when I talked about the focus and the discussion and conversations at our board being on freeing up and hopefully attracting more money, it's absolutely to go into this club and community space. It's about reducing that financial burden and administrative burden on club volunteers who want to coach children and young people to take part in sport. They don't want to be spending all their time with all these other things. So our plans will be absolutely about focusing in and building on the success of that type of model.
Thank you. Can I thank the witnesses for their attendance at committee today and for staying slightly past the agreed time. And you're now free to go. Committee will continue. The third item on our agenda today is consideration of 3 negative instruments. The first instrument is the National Assistance Sums for Personal Requirements Scotland Regulations 2025. The purpose of the instrument is to increase the value of personal expenses allowance in line with average earnings, an increase of 4.1%. The policy note states that this allowance is usually increased each April at the same time as social security benefits are uprated. The Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee considered the instrument at its meeting on the 25th of February and made no recommendations in relation to the instrument, and no motion to annul has been received in relation to the instrument. Do members have any comments? No? Okay. I propose that the committee does not make any recommendations in relation to this negative instrument. Does any member disagree with this? The second instrument is the National Assistance Assessment of Resources Amendment Scotland Regulations 2025. The purpose of the instrument is to increase the value of savings credit disregard from £8.15 to £8.50 for a single person and from £12.10 to £12.60 for a couple, in line with the increase in average earnings, which is currently forecast at 4.1%. The instrument also increases the lower capital limit from £21,500 to £22,000 and the upper capital limit from £35,000 to £35,500, in line with the increase in the Consumer Price Index, which is forecast at 1.7%. Finally, the instrument also disregards various payments to individuals living in residential care, ensuring that these payments are not taken into consideration by local authorities when carrying out a financial assessment for charges for those living in residential care. The Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee considered the instrument at its meeting on the 25th of February and made no recommendations in relation to the instrument. No motion to annul has been received in relation to this instrument. Do members have any comments? No. I propose that the committee does not make any recommendations in relation to the negative instrument. Does any member disagree with this? The third instrument is the National Health Service Common Staffing Method Scotland Amendment Regulations 2025. The purpose of the instrument is to amend the National Health Service Common Staffing Method Scotland Regulations 2024, which specify the staffing level and professional judgment tools that must be used as part of the common staffing method for specified kinds of healthcare provision. The Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee considered the instrument at its meeting on the 4th of March and made no recommendations in relation to this instrument. No motion to annul has been received in relation to this instrument, and I believe Sandish Gohani has a comment to make.
Thank you, Convener. A declaration of interest as a practising NHS GP. There are 1,003 consultant vacancies. There are 3,100 nursing vacancies across NHS Scotland. Doctors and nurses up and down the country are working on underfilled rotas, covering and cross-covering, doing extra shifts and suffering moral injury. Not a single NHS worker believes that these regulations have improved their rotas and their work life. The Cabinet Secretary has broken his promise to our nursing colleagues in a deal he struck to reduce their working hours. So how do nurses feel about fair work and fair pay when trust has been shattered. Managers have no consequences when flogging our hard-working NHS staff. They sit in their cosy offices on huge fat cap wages, watching our staff burn out. There is no managerial accountability. And so I would like to see the Minister in charge come and discuss this with us to see what actual tangible difference we can have with our doctors and nurses that are working so hard and to actually have genuine safe staffing.
Emma Harper.
Sorry, I pushed my button by mistake. So, I mean, I would maybe be interested in getting some further information on what is it we're talking about when we're talking about common staff and methods, because I know in intensive care units it's quite often 1-to-1, one patient, one nurse. In recovery room it's 2-to-1. In the operating room department you can't cut skin until you've got a certain amount of people in the department, whether it, and then it's very based on type of anaesthetic, type of surgery, whether the patient's awake, things like that. So that would be in my own previous specific experience in the perioperative environment. We do also have new roles with physicians associates, anaesthesia associates, and I'm sure surgical assistants as well. So it'd be interesting to see specifically, rather than looking at you know, whether it's about reducing work hours, and I think that's in process. I don't think the Cabinet Secretary has betrayed anybody. I think that is an ongoing discussion. So I might be interested in finding out, fleshing out the detail on what this this regulation actually means.
Brian Whittle.
Yeah, just listening to my colleagues, I think what strikes me is the disparity between what we're trying to do here and the reality on the ground. I mean, the number of healthcare professionals I've spoken to in an acute environment where staffing levels are putting them under extraordinary pressure and actually, you know, a danger to patients. So there is a disparity between, in some cases, between what's legally required and what's actually happening on the ground. And I think that to my colleague Sandra Gulhani's point, I think it would be to our advantage to have the Minister or the Cabinet Secretary come in here and let us discuss that.
Okay, so given the timescales with which the committee has to consider this regulation, then I would propose that clerks write to the relevant Cabinet Secretary or Minister, if that's delegated to Minister, to come to committee next week and speak to the regulations, specifically the staffing levels and professional judgment tools. Are committee content with that proposal? Yeah. Grand, thank you. The committee's next formal meeting will be on Tuesday the 18th of March, when we will begin taking oral evidence on the Right to Addiction Recovery Scotland Bill, and that concludes the public part of our meeting today.